Welcome to Recovery Report Live. I'm Dan Odess, president of GlobalPro, where we manage risk to recovery, and we have managed more than $1 billion in recovery. Why does that matter? We want to make sure that you are getting industry information from industry experts, and that's exactly what we are. We are on the edge of learning about what is going on, and that certainly in the disaster zone of Hurricane Ian, as well as on the fronts of many different economic changes that are occurring that are impacting your insurance and your business decisions. And we want to make sure that you have all the information you can use when making the appropriate decisions that are in the best interest of your community association or your business. There's many things going on that are impacting our insurance and the way in which we transact business today. And unfortunately, whether we're in a recession or the recession is coming, things are changing. But construction costs have definitely come down, except for cement being an integral part of the process for reconstruction. It's taking a big toll on the efforts that are going on right now in the Southwest Florida, as well as Central Florida and the Carolinas have been impacted. I can tell you that right now. Why? Because I've been on the front lines working with the women and men that are helping make it possible for our community to rebuild. Now, what's important about that is there are many changes in our economy that are occurring that are also taking an impact. Supply chain issues continue to be an issue, many other contributing factors. And also, too, the anniversary of major storms and disasters that have struck, we keep up one after another. I kind of feel like every time I look down at my social media feed, there's another anniversary of another disaster that might have occurred somewhere and around this time of year. Why? Because a lot of the major storms have impacted us at the end of hurricane season. But being that we are still hurricane season, we are dealing with it, but there are some winter storms that continue to roll through the western areas as well as the northeast area, already experiencing some signs of winter with some snow that is falling. So we got to start thinking about the colder climate changes and those impacts that they have on things. But one of the anniversaries that recently happened was Superstorm Sandy. And in 2012, March of 2012, I started GlobalPro. And now 10 years later, we are celebrating the anniversary of Superstorm Sandy. And I say celebrating because we're celebrating how our community rebounded from that major disaster. There was so much community effort. The community came together to make it possible for such a massive area that is impacted by storms. And if you go through those areas that have been impacted, there's very little sign of Superstorm Sandy and the scars it left on those communities. But obviously it did take a toll on a lot of businesses as well as communities, and it took quite a while to recover. And the folks out west in the southwest state of Florida are dealing with that right now and planning for what's next, going through the rebuilding efforts and the planning for the rebuilding. And it's important to reflect and remember back on those times where we were able to rebuild from that, to think of things positively, have a positive outlook on what's to come, to make sure that we are continuing to look forward, because we are there on the front lines with our community doing what we can at GlobalPro, and we hope all of you are doing the same and can celebrate the time that our community came back together and helped our communities rebuild from these major disasters. And I want to think that way. I want to think positively. I want to think optimistically about what is going on. This shouldn't just be about just all the loss of life and everything else. This should be about a time that we're all coming together, that we're all going to celebrate life, that we have the opportunities that we have in front of us. We want to forge ahead. We want to look forward. When you obtain those recoveries, we want to make sure that you're spending the money on the things that matter most. We want to make sure that you're actually doing what you're supposed to do, so that in the next time that something were to happen, that you don't negatively impact your opportunity to place insurance, recover from loss, whatever it may be. It's an opportunity for us to make sure that all of you have what you need and make sure that you're getting the information you can use in the time of need, like right now. We are hearing stories of victims from Hurricane Ian that have gotten recoveries, but quite frankly don't know what to do next. Because why? Labor is still an issue. It's certainly an issue that's plagued the Southwest Florida area for quite some time. While there are some pockets of affluent professionals that have done well for themselves and have very large homes that are waterfront areas that have been impacted, there is also a working class situation there where there's no housing. Affordable housing has been an issue. So finding labor, finding people that can help with the reconstruction or rebuilding efforts, whether it's on the barrier islands, whether it's in a lot of the communities, Fort Myers Beach particularly. We are talking with some local contractors right now that are busing in people from other parts of the state that are basically building makeshift residents on Sanibel to be able to house these individuals to help with the rebuilding efforts. Because again, there's an issue of not only is it like non-existing housing right now, but there's always been an issue of affordable housing for those that are actually going to be helping with the rebuilding efforts, that are going to continue providing the services, help our businesses, employ the employees for our businesses, get back to business as usual. I was in several different restaurants that are experiencing definitely shortages of staff. We're getting into the busy part of the season. So for instance, if the restaurant wasn't already shut down from the storm, it's now dealing with a stressed working staff that's having to take on more obligations because we already have less housing, because what housing may have been there may have been damaged by this big storm. That may be occupied by those that are in the area, that live there as full-time residents, or those that vacation in the area may have taken up residence in some of the homes that may have been available to the employees and staffs, which is driving up rental rates. There's a calamity of issues going on, and it's not just specific to the area in which Hurricane Ian hit. There's a big talk, South Florida region. Same thing, affordable housing seems to be the issue, rising rental costs. But again, is there a reset here? Are we at an inflection point? Who knows? I mean, it's a difficult thing. We do want to talk to industry experts all the time about these issues because, for instance, additional living expenses. If you lost your home and you have to go rent a property in order to stay in the local area because your kids go to school there, and rental rates are out of control, and you have this competition with again, the labor force that's coming into the area, as well as vacationers that don't have their vacation home anymore, but want to continue on the family tradition of coming into the area. And these are all real stories and things I hear about every single day. It becomes very complicated because maybe you don't have enough coverage right now because the additional living expense limit that you have was based on the market rate of your home prior to the storm. But now, again, less inventory, higher prices driving it up. Is your insurance company going to respond the same? Who knows? But we do have a guest that's coming on here today to talk more about this, and we have our very own Rob Bowlby in the Texas market that dove into a little bit more about what's going on in the housing market, but not just about Florida, but throughout the country. And I think a lot of the comments I just made is not just, again, not relevant to the Southwest Florida, Southeast Florida, or really just Florida itself, but I think it's impacting us throughout the country, and I think there's a lot of things that are changing. So I want to welcome to the show Phil and Rob. Thank you guys so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
Good morning, Dan.
So Phil, with the Dallas Builders Association, certainly you have your finger on the pulse of things that are changing within the communities at large, and particularly those in Texas. I was just talking about some of the things that I'm seeing right now on ground zero with Hurricane Ian, and something I was actually dealing with much of this week is placing a lot of our clients in alternative living situations. It's become quite a struggle because of the rising rent. We already had the rising rent issues, obviously, through the last this upturn and the cost of living that's going on throughout because of undersupply issue. But tell me about the Dallas Builders Association, what its purpose is, organization, and what does it offer both builders and other industries related to the residential construction?
Well, again, thanks for having me. And I think the most concise way that I can describe the Dallas Builders Association is that we're essentially a chamber of commerce for the housing industry, for residential home builders, all the professional service providers, suppliers that are a part of this industry, this big machine that is housing. They all come under this roof, and what we try to do is educate them, be an advocate for them, and also do everything we can to make the networking connections that are out there, and also be a resource for the consumer. If there's a disaster, you need to know the contractors in your area and distinguish who's in it for the right reasons versus the people that may follow these storms around and not be in it for the right reasons.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, it's great. Oh, go ahead, Rob. Sorry about that.
No, go ahead.
I think there's a little lag in our communication here, so go ahead.
So we've been members of the Dallas Builders Association since we launched last year here in Texas, and it's been one of the best organizations we've joined. So Phil, thank you for all the content you provide, and I'd like you to share a little bit about that. In particular, I've seen some of your presentations around population growth trends in Texas and in North Texas in particular. some of which were really eye-opening and I've actually used in some of my own presentations. So if you would talk a little bit about what you're seeing as far as the migration into Texas and North Texas relative to other states.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And this is important when we think about where we are versus where we're going in this adjustment that we're going through, this normalization in the housing industry. I tell people around here all the time, you've heard it from me, and the fact is that homes are where the jobs sleep at night. And in this region, over the next 5 years, we're expecting about 440,000 jobs over the next 5 years. They're going to need a place to sleep. That corresponds to about 615,000 additional in population. And so that is obviously going to bode well for the housing industry and the growth that we're going to have and the ability to accommodate them in this region, which I think will remain the top home building market in the country like it has been for the last few years.
And so, and then there's a couple news stories this week that I found really interesting. One was from the Urban Land Institute had their conference here, and I think Dallas moved up 5 spots in the emerging, I can't remember what that's called, Emerging Trends in Real Estate Market Report. We were 7th last year. This year we're 2nd only to Nashville, which is pretty exciting. And then something this morning in the Dallas Morning News said that within 10 years, Dallas is going to surpass Chicago as the 3rd largest MSA in the country. That's really interesting. And so other than the job growth, are there other factors you think that's really contributing to Dallas's kind of tremendous growth?
Yeah, I think at the heart of it is that this is the best place in the country to be able to find affordable communities, obtainable housing, pretty good schools in every city that you're able to go to. And you just look at the top 12 markets. You alluded to it before with the fact that we're just about ready to pass Chicago. The last 3 years in terms of job change, there's only 5 metro areas out of the top 12 that are positive in job growth. Dallas is number 1 with 321,000 new jobs. If you add up the next 4 that are positive behind us, those cumulatively do not equal the job growth that we've seen in the DFW area. So it's just astounding the strength that we've seen with people coming here. They're not coming for the mountains or the beach. We don't really have any of those, but they're coming for the opportunities, and we have plenty of them.
Yeah, but I gotta admit, the being in Dallas is refreshing. Even though we do have the beach in South Florida area, as well as Southwest Florida, but still, there's definitely a certain charm about Dallas, Texas, and I think it's why we're there. And I think there's a huge opportunity in front of us. Now, there's a lot of talk about the interest rates, right? The raising interest rates and what impacts that has on growth, right? How much have these rate increases softened demand this past summer?
They've really had made it a difficult time in the housing market, but it's really kind of a challenge on top of a challenge on top of a challenge. You alluded to some of this in your monologue, just with the inflationary environment, the lack of labor, supply chain issues, and now you put interest rates on top of it. And while on one hand, I'm definitely a believer in trying to find opportunity in every difficulty, it's hard to find that opportunity if you're dealing with an environment where interest rates and mortgages are twice for the same amount of home what they were perhaps a year ago. And while on one hand, I understand we have to get the inflation under control, and that's what the Fed's working to do, the fact of the matter is the higher interest rates go, the lower the demand is going to be for housing. And unfortunately, the less attainable it's going to be for especially working people, young families, first-time home buyers, which has a huge societal impact, let alone an economic one.
Yeah, I've been seeing there's been some calculators floated around showing the difference between a mortgage at 2.7 versus 4.6 and then 7.6, and it kind of bounces around, and it shows you what it does to affordability and how that changes, that tremendously, and it kind of shifts you economically, from one bracket to the next, and how quickly that can take a toll on that. From the contractor standpoint, now I'm a licensed general contractor, been in the construction industry for 30 some years, grew up in the business, certainly have seen the ups and downs. I used to hear my dad grumble over it all the time, and now, and then I got into the construction business, saw it myself through the recession, then got into insurance. So now I kind of feel like I'm sitting on the outside looking in. what does this mean to contractors? Is it going to, are they ready for it? Are they, do you think that the industry's smarter today? Do you think they're planning better for it, or are they still buying the big boat and the small boat and everything else in between, and hoping for that next pay wreck?
I don't think anybody's in the market for a helicopter, nor have they really even had time to look for anything like that over the last 3 years, because it's just been so busy. It's been so difficult to keep up. Consequently, because it's been so difficult to keep up, you haven't seen a large glut of inventory. In fact, I'm seeing, if you look at all the numbers and the projections, that the inventory levels from the record lows during the COVID-induced boom, you're starting to see them level about out to the 2016 to 2018 timeframe, which actually, A, is healthy, and B, I tell our members, hey, those weren't bad years for you, and you'd probably like to get back there because there was a lot more certainty during that time too. The road there is going to be a bit bumpy, but it looks like from a macro level, things are actually going to be okay, barring any sort of unforeseen thing that may impact rates or otherwise.
Well, and Phil, you talked about the affordability as rates passed that 7% mark for 30-year mortgage, which they really did. And so I know that Dallas Builders Association has a multifamily focus as well. In fact, I just came from the multifamily council right before this show. What does that do to multifamily? Like, if these people can't afford a house, do they stay renters? And if they stay renters, does that further constrain the multifamily supply? And does that mean rents aren't going to come down? What does that mean for rents right now?
Yeah, I think you explained it pretty well, that creates an environment where rents they're going to stay elevated, and perhaps be more so because the multifamily builders, the same as the single family, have been constrained by the supply chain issues, the inflationary environment vis-a-vis the materials, the labor problems that we had prior to the COVID period and that we're going to have for the foreseeable future after. So there's not really much relief in sight. It becomes a rental situation for a lot of people by necessity. Certainly our members are equipped to try to accommodate that, but there are challenges nonetheless in that world, the same as there are on the single family side. But we're doing everything we can to get a roof over everybody's head because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of folks on their way.
So, yeah, and a lot of, I think the other thing that you think about long term is the longer those people are renters and rents going up, that's less money they're saving to be a homeowner at some point. So it not only impacts today's home building market, but probably the home building market 3 to 5 years down the road.
This is what we're trying to talk to policymakers about, is think about the long-term societal impacts of the loss of the greatest wealth-creating opportunity that most families can find for perhaps an entire generation of home buyer. And that's why we've got to get our policy in line with the reality that if we want to get people into a home, it's got to be affordable. It can't be affordable if you make building more expensive. All the things that are happening right now are making financing more expensive, and they're going the wrong direction.
Going the wrong direction, somewhat like the supply chain issues. Definitely a top of mind issue. I hear about it all the time, particularly we're on the front lines dealing with recovering from loss and damage. How are you seeing this? You mentioned it, but if we delve into that a little bit deeper, what are home builders particularly experiencing right now when it comes to supply chain issues? Is it the lumber? Is it the petroleum products? What are your driving costs, and where are your biggest issues?
Well, Daniel, it's funny. It's like we've been playing whack-a-mole for the last 3 years almost, and it's been something new every time, almost to the point where my phone rings and I'm like, now what? Things that you never foresaw being a problem. Usually if you have a hurricane, if you have a flood, it'll be, you're going to have a problem with lumber for a while. You'll have a problem with sheetrock for a while. This has been all the alarm bells ringing, and in places I'd never seen it before. I think if you polled our membership right now, the top concerns are still windows and doors, garage doors, interestingly enough. In Texas, HVAC equipment, because some of our SEER standards are about to change. And then a year ago, we were just talking about lumber, because lumber a year ago was adding $30,000 to the price of every home here, and it just gone ballistic in terms of pricing. It's probably only adding $8,000 to $9,000 to the price of a new home. And so because of that, it ranks like 12th in terms of the things that people are worried about instead of like numbers 1 through 6 like it did a year ago.
No, it's funny you say lumber because that was one of the top things. I was recently at a FEMA conference where they were talking about the latest changes, and it was on Zoom, and I was listening to the woman kind of run down some of the where they see some of these supplemental pricing databases are going to, some of the changes. And the one thing she highlighted is don't expect lumber to be 25% more. In fact, it's actually the opposite. So they actually see a decrease in the cost of that because there's according to her, there's an oversupply. But as you mentioned, drywall, some of those things, they were definitely saying there's going to be some serious price hikes when it comes to some of the let me call it the hard surface materials, your Durock, your drywall, sheetrock, whatever you want to call it, the green board, blue board, those different types of products. They're expecting tremendous price increases over the next 4 to 8 months. So we're trying to price all that into our valuations of damages, but as a public adjuster representing a policyholder, trying to anticipate where they're going to land after we make the demand and when it's going to get settled and when they're going to get paid. That could be anywhere between a 60-day to a let's say 120-day process, right? From the time that we make our initial demand to the time that they actually get the check in hand. Well, right now, with how quickly things change, as you remarked, I mean, where are we going to end up is anyone's guess. And so we have questions about, when do we settle the claim? And I'm like, I don't know that you could ever settle a claim from Hurricane Ian because we have no idea where you're going to end up with that settlement with the insurance company, money in hand, and then actually be able to spend the money. And that percolates throughout, I would say, most markets throughout the country. Major ports like in the Dallas, Texas, the Houston, Texas area, as well as Miami, these other places where a lot of these products come in and out of or are actually processed. I think I think it's really relevant and an important topic. And certainly, you think about an area like Southwest Florida, they don't really have a major port nearby. The only thing they have is Tampa, which pales in comparison to the size of, let's say, some of the other ports that you have up and down the East Coast. So I think there's just a lot of scrambling around kind of considering, because once it hits the port, then it has to get down into the areas. Then there's that increase in double cost of that. The cost of fuel is way up. So there's just things are just compounding themselves. So definitely in a world of hurt there.
Definitely.
Yeah, just continuing with that, Dan, I was at the meeting I was at with multifamily was the new changes to the International Building Code compliance for energy efficiency. And Phil, I know you couldn't be there, but there was a pretty spirited discussion about the changes that Fort Worth and Denton and some of the other cities had already adopted, Dallas was about to adopt, and what it was going to add to the cost of building both single-family rentals and multifamily buildings. And it's a sizable cost. I mean, it makes me think if we think of our code compliance addendums on the insurance policies, some of the things I heard today, I'm not sure those supplements are going to be enough to cover it.
No, it's going to be a struggle. So
yeah, it's tough out there, and not getting any better.
Yeah. So last thing, I think, Dan, that was a good segue into what we do. We are insurance policyholder advocates on the recovery side. And Phil, sadly, we weren't in Texas yet during the big freeze, but I know the Dallas Builders Association suffered a loss at their headquarters. And I know you guys engaged a public adjuster to represent you through the process. And I'd just like to hear a little bit about how your experience was and why you believe in the benefit of having an advocate for you as you went through the process.
You mentioned the key word right there, having an advocate in the process. And you would think, well, it's a builders association. You should know everything there is to know about building. Luckily, we were in good hands with a great general contractor, and you can see some of his handiwork behind me. But when it comes to the insurance part of the game, which funds the rebuilding project and definitely you depend on it to get back on your feet. It's so technical, it's so nuanced, it's so painstaking, at least with our process, that if you don't have an advocate, if you don't have somebody that really knows how to overcome those barriers and has gone through this before, because for us, yeah, we know about building, but we hadn't gone through a claim or a loss like this. Having an advocate is the best thing that you can do. You need to be thinking about that first before you go to battle on something like this, especially if you have a large claim like ours.
I appreciate that, Phil. So how can our audience find out about the Dallas Builders Association, get in touch with you to find out all the great things that you guys are doing?
Appreciate that. Go to DallasBuilders.org, DallasBuilders.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, see everything that we're up to.
I appreciate that information. Well, Rob, any closing remarks?
Nope, just we're glad to be part of the organization. And Phil, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for being a member. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you to Rob and Phil. Thank you guys for coming on here today. Great conversation about important issues, certainly impacting the greater Dallas area there. It was great to have Phil on to take some of his time to talk about what his organization does. We're very much a part of that community, the construction community, whether I'm a general contractor, having built in many different markets up and down the East Coast, but knowing that our very own Rob Bowlby's there in the market, interacting with the construction organizations, finding out what they're doing, because that is one very impactful organization that has the information, has all of the information that you would need, whether you're a professional as a builder, you're interested in developing, you're looking for qualified contractors, definitely reach out to them, check them out. You heard it right there. We'll make sure all their information is obviously down in the description right below this video so that you can reach out to them, get in touch with them, get the information they have, because that's what the Recovery Report Live has always been about. It's about making sure that you have the information you can use. I want to thank again Rob and Phil for joining us here today on the Recovery Report, and we'll see you same place, same time, right here on the Recovery Report Live next week at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.